Let's begin by looking at the harmony of Girl from Ipanema. So the Girl from Ipanema has an unusually long song form. Most jazz standards are 32 bars in length, but this one is 40 bars, and that's mostly due to the extra long bridge that we're going to be talking about in great detail throughout this course. The A section begins on the 1 chord, the tonic chord, which in this key is F major 7. We have that for 2 bars, and then we go to a G dominant 7, and then in basic terms we actually have a 2, 5, 1, and then basically a 5-1 again. So if you're connecting this A section to other standards like Take the A Train, then that's how you will see the harmony to those tunes written out. Basically 1 chord for 2 bars, secondary dominant of the 2nd degree of the scale for 2 bars, 2-5-1 back to the tonic, and then usually a 1-6-2-5 at the end. However, Girl from Ipanema is a little bit different than that. The main difference with Girl from Ipanema is that we have a tritone substitution. So basically in the 2-5-1 in the last 4 bars, instead of a C7, we have a G flat 7, usually a G flat 7 sharp 11 right there, and that basically changes the sound of it in a way, but it's still fundamentally the same thing, because if you play a G flat 7 there, and then if you play a C7, that'd be like a C7 flat 9, you can hear it really is basically the same chord. The only difference is that when you have G flat 7, you have a chromatically descending bass line to get back to the 1 chord. And at the very end of the A section, you go back to that G flat 7, which is really just acting as a C7. So that would be the A section. So 1 chord for 2 bars, 2 dominant 7, 2 tritone, and then back to 1 chord, and then upper semitone on the first time ending. On the second time, you basically just stay on the F major 7 for 2 bars. So that's what's going on with the A section. That brings us on to the bridge, which is often the most confusing part of the song to harmonically analyse, but it's not that difficult when you break it down and see what's going on. So first things first, we're into a new key really. We're into F sharp major. All the A sections were in F, and then the melody very clearly brings us to an F sharp major 7 chord, or a G flat, whichever way you want to look at it. We have that for 2 bars, and then it basically goes to a 4 dominant 7, right? So if you think about the key of F sharp and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th note is a B7, which is quite unusual really to have one song that goes from a 1 major 7 to a 4 dominant 7. So that's what's going on there. Now there's various different ways that you can look at this, and we're going to be really exploring some of these in the improv section, but you could also say these first 2 chords as being F sharp major. Now if you look at B7, this is B9 right here, that's also basically an F sharp minor 7, right? If you think of the 2 that goes with the 5, if this was a 5 chord in the key of E, then 2 would be F sharp minor. So what you can do is just think of F sharp major for 2 bars, and then you can think of F sharp minor, and that brings us to connecting this with many more jazz standards. Things like All of Me, Misty, Oasis and Beatles songs have a 1 chord that becomes minor, especially a 4 chord in the overall key. But when you're memorising this, I think it's important to initially respect the composer's original chords there. So I would say, to begin with, just think of that as being a B7. Now, you would usually expect that to resolve maybe to an E or an E minor or something like that, but that's not what happens here. The melody actually comes back down to an F sharp again, but this time we're in F sharp minor. So we've already kind of changed key, haven't we? You could argue that. So we've gone from F major right there to B7, come back down to F sharp minor. So it's almost like this is a new kind of partial new key, isn't it? Just even if it's only there for a couple of bars. The good news is though, if you do think of that as being a 2-5 in E, F sharp minor, B7, it doesn't really sound like it's treble key, does it? F sharp major, secondary dominant of that key, and then back to F sharp minor 7. So it's not, you know, even though F sharp minor is not in either of those keys, it doesn't sound like it's really gone that far. After that, basically we have a move that starts to get us back to the overall tonic of the entire song, which is F, and we go to a D7, right? So the important thing, there's 2 things to notice here. The first is that D7 is the 5 chord of the 2 chord in F. So the 2 chord in F is G minor 7. So a secondary dominant that would get us back to G minor 7 would be D7. So that's one way you can look at that. And then another thing is to try and spot the intervallic distance between what we've just travelled there. So F sharp minor to D. So that's basically going up. If you think of that as being A minor, that's like it's going up a third, right? The reason why that's important is because the bridge does the exact same thing in a minute. So it's important to note that intervallic distance between those 2 chords. Okay, so I hope that covers the first half of the bridge. So F sharp major 2 bars, B7 2 bars, F sharp minor 7 2 bars, and then you could either think A minor or D9 would work there. So now we're in the last 8 bars of the bridge. As I said before, the same movement of what we've just talked about, F sharp minor to D, happens a semitone higher. So that would be G minor 7 to E flat 7. Okay, so in relation to F, you could think of this as being 2 minor 7 to a flat 7. And this is really common practice in jazz standards. There's a few other jazz standards that use this kind of motion. One is When Sunny Gets Blue, the jazz ballad. And another is The Days of Wine and Roses, where you've got 2 bars of G minor. And then 2 bars of a minor 7, which is a minor third up from the chord that came before it. So that's exactly what's going on here, right? We have that thing going on. So after all that, we're starting to make our way back to the A section, and what we then do is we have a 3, 6, 2, 5, which would get us back to our tonic key. So those chords would be A minor 7, D7, usually some kind of alterations on the dominant, G minor 7, and then basically some extensions and alterations on the 5 chord there. So that would be 3, 6, 2, 5, and then that brings us back to the A section, which we've already talked about. So to recap the entire bridge, you're best off memorising it this way. F sharp major 7, so you're going up a semitone from the overall key, then it goes to a secondary dominant, we're going to a 4 dominant 7 chord, then we're going, I guess you could think of that as being a 1 minor 7 chord, kind of, and then you're going to go up a minor third. I like to think of that as going up a minor third, then you're going to go down, and then you're going to go up a minor third again, and then you've got 3, 6, 2, 5, and then you're back into the A section. So hopefully this harmonic analysis will help you understand that this is not as difficult as sometimes what it's made out to be. It's a little bit more unusual because it's got a longer bridge, but many Latin and Brazilian standards have longer song forms and more complex chords. They're very beautiful and rich harmonic progressions. So that is just something that you get more used to with the more Latin and Brazilian standards that you learn. So if all that makes sense to you, the best thing to do, the first assignment that I'd like to give you would be to try and memorise those chords using the Roman numeral system. Very important that you memorise it, that way you want everything to stick and you want it to be transferable to other keys should you need to be able to do that, especially that A section. So with the chords that you already know, you could be, just a couple of chords into your jazz guitar journey, try and go through that standard using those grips to really try and memorise the chord progression, and that will give you a solid foundation for moving on to the improvisation and also some of the combinatudes that I've written out.